Okay, so I've been doing this whole photography thing since senior year of high school, or about 7 years now, which makes me feel really old now that I say it. But you don't have to be into the world of photography all too long to learn about what the nifty 50 lens is, or really just a 50mm prime lens. You probably learn about what it is pretty soon after you learn what an interchangeable lens camera is. Those things kind of go hand in hand. The nifty 50 is pretty legendary for a few reasons, and if I had to summarize it, the tagline would go something like this. It is a do-it-all focal length at an affordable price point with a very fast minimum aperture, and all that into a compact body that you can just always have on you for under $150 or so. That's perfect. Oh, and I almost forgot, but because it's a prime lens, the optical quality is usually a touch higher than that of zoom lenses, especially when you compare older prime lenses to older zoom lenses. But with all this being said, it's very easy to see why this would be an excellent choice for a beginner photographer, or anyone who's even an expert. But even though I've been doing photography for all this time, I've never actually used one before. Throughout all my time as a photographer so far, the only time I had access to a 50mm lens was an old 18-55 on a crop sensor, the Canon EOS M3 one actually. And not only am I surprised that I haven't used this lens from just a practical standpoint, but also because it seems like a rite of passage for photography, in the same way that gripping your own skateboard might be, or developing your own film. It's something that connects you to the larger fabric of photography. Now, one of my concerns with making this video is that I'm talking about something so basic, so fundamental, that I have nothing to add to the conversation. But on the other hand, I also experience that same thought with just about every video that I make. So as usual, I'm here to share my own experiences and my own opinions. And the way I'm going to do that in this video is talk about more of the field of view rather than the lens itself. But I do have to talk a little bit about glass. We can't get away from it, right? So about 4 months ago, I decided that I was going to pull the trigger on a 50mm prime lens, and I did a bunch of research to figure out what was going to be right for me. And in the Sony ecosystem, I landed on this guy, the Sony 50mm 2.5G. Without getting into too much detail, this thing is very tiny, as you can see. It is weather sealed, it has an aperture ring, it has excellent optical quality, excellent autofocus, and it has 49mm threads that is compatible with all the filters that I own. I think it's a bit overpriced when bought new, but eBay helped me save a decent chunk of change. I think it was so cheap because there was one listing picture on eBay that looked like complete shit and nobody else wanted to take a risk on it. But because of eBay's buyer protection policies and all that, I didn't really see it as too much of a risk, so I just went for it, and this thing is completely fine, so my W. Anyways, I know there's a lot of 50mm lenses that are f1.4, f1.8, but this one is much smaller, and I'd rather have the compact size than the extra light let in. But enough about this guy, let's talk about what makes the 50mm focal length magical. One of the most commonly shared ideas about the 50mm focal length that kind of drove me crazy is that 50mm is the closest equivalent to what our eyes see. And honestly, this always confused me because I don't know about you guys, but I can see a whole lot wider than 50mm. So for anyone else on my wavelength, let me break it down a little bit for you. This whole equivalent to the human eye thing is really talking about compression, more specifically how we perceive near-far relationships between objects around us. So if you look at something around you with a wide-angle lens, it's going to look really far away comparatively to looking at that same object with a telephoto lens. It's going to look closer. And this whole 50mm thing is said to be the equivalent to what our eyes see because it does a really good job mimicking that near-far relationship that we see with our own eyes, not necessarily the field of view that we have. So even though we have a much wider field of view with our eyes than 50mm, the 50mm lens does a good job mimicking of what we see directly in front of us. It makes things feel normal, and that's the magic word here. And I know that this is a little bit counterintuitive because magic feels like the opposite of normal, but bear with me. In my experience with the 50mm, this normal focal length pushes me towards shooting everyday things, which sounds boring, but I think is actually pretty special. The main reason for this is that it's exceptionally easy to compose a competent image at 50mm. You can take a picture of a street scene, your dinner, flowers, cars, whatever. Just aiming your camera at the subject will usually be a foundation to a decent photo with the 50 because it's so easy to fill the frame. Better yet, that fast aperture comes in clutch for some juicy portraits. And I think that's the main reason I've really been enjoying this lens. This is a great lens to just bring wherever you're going. With this lens, I've been shooting way more shutter and aperture priority and even program mode. I've just been throwing it on ISO 400 or 800 and letting the camera do the rest. I'm biking no hands with this setup. I don't really care. I'm much more concerned about getting a photo with this setup rather than just the photo and going crazy over the settings to make sure everything's perfect. It's almost like having a point and shoot in a sense, which is a really refreshing and rewarding style of photography that I never seem to touch these days because I'm focused on taking manual photographs and nailing composition and stuff like that. On the video side of things, I think the 50mm field of view really shines too. Combining this familiar field of view with some shallow depth of field, good light, and simple framing can make a shot feel like more than the sum of its parts. But honestly, I guess this isn't that surprising because the 50mm has been a kit lens for all these reasons in the past. I guess I was just surprised by how quickly and instantaneously it changed the shots that I was choosing to take. But I gotta keep it a stack and be honest with you saying that I don't think the 50mm is gonna stay glued to my camera in the same way that 24mm does, because it does have a few shortcomings that are personal to me. Okay, so while these quote normal images can capture our lives in a way that's visually interesting but feels familiar, that familiarity can also feel a little bit boring. Now, I'm not saying I've mastered composition for standard focal lengths, or any focal length for that matter, but I will say this. Sound composition at 50mm feels significantly less rewarding than sound composition at 24mm. I guess I just find the 50mm to be too straightforward. What you see is what you get. When I point my camera at a scene, I don't feel encouraged to work the scene, but when I look through the viewfinder with the 24mm lens on, I see how far away I am from a really good composition, and I have to work to get towards something that I even consider acceptable and worth pressing the shutter for. And I like that work. I like being able to push the scene and see what I can get out of my situation. But when everything falls in line with the 24mm, you are rewarded with an awesome image, something that shows a whole space rather than just a little bit of a peek into it. And I think that's also just a preference thing. I know that I like to shoot wider, and I often felt like with the 50mm, I'm not getting as much as I'd like in, or I'm stepping back, or I'm just accepting that I'm cutting stuff out. So I don't even know if that's really a shortcoming. Maybe that's just a preference thing. So yeah, that's that. Another prime lens for the collection, I guess. I think this thing will be a great travel companion, provided its size and the focal length that is, like I said, kind of do it all. So I'll be happy to put that to work in the future. I've shot with, let's see, a 16-35 now, an 85, a 50, a 40, and a 24. So I guess the next focal length would probably be like a fisheye or something, or maybe a telephoto zoom. I don't really got telephoto zoom money right now though, so that's gonna be a little ways in the future. Anyways, if this video made you want to pick up a camera, then you can like and subscribe. If it didn't, you can harass me in the comments. Until next time, y'all.